If you guys are ready, we'll get fired up here. Sound-wise, we sound okay? Okay. Yeah, just let me know if you can't hear, or if you're hearing too loud, we'll turn it down. But just kind of start off with an overview here. Those of you that don't know him, my name's Ken Souter. I cover northern Indiana. Actually, I live right back by the plant and have been with Precision for pretty well from the beginning. So I can tell you a lot of the things we've tried over the years. I can tell you a lot of the screw ups we've done. As growers, we all learn from the things we goof up. So we do put out a lot of plots, and that's the learning journey we're on. Today, we're going to focus strictly on the Gen 3 here this morning. First thing, I know some of you got some brand new units, so I'll take and there is a sound setting in here, and we can go in, we can set that, turn the volume off. But before we leave today, remind me, we need to go back in and turn those back on for you. Or otherwise, the first day in spring, it's going to be a bad day. So if we come here, and typically, and your screen may not look like this, but up at the top, there's three standards every time. There's a standard, a metric, and a large map. Now, I've got a pretty busy metric on mine just because I've got a lot of things set up. So yours may be pretty simple. Don't worry about that at this time. If I want to look at my sound settings, I come here to my setup, and underneath over here on my right-hand side. So who's brand new to a Gen 3? Which groups do I have? Okay, great. So basically over here on the right-hand side is where we do all of our setup. Down here underneath system, we're going to have a number of our different equipment we have on there. If you slide to the bottom, there should be a display setting. And when I come to that display setting, there's a sound. And here's where I have to make my selections on how loud I want my different sounds. And you notice there's a couple of different things, and I want to explain the difference in it. So failure would be very specifically when I run out of seed. Basically, when I get below a certain percentage, it's going to take me down, okay? The alert is a different setting. It is not failure mode. Alert is if I'm planting in a swath situation, I come to that last pass, and I have a couple of rows that are swathed off. I want to be aware that it is swathed off. Okay, now most of you, I'm going to tell you, we're going to stay in automatic mode, so it'll automatically turn back on. Some of you may, if you're planting sweet corn, you may just have 4 rows turned on, and you may have the others set off. I don't want you to forget that you're only planting with 4 rows and start planting field corn. So that's why we have alert and failure as 2 different systems, okay? And then I can set volume level on each one of those. That's just a slider bar that slides up and down. But you're going to notice I have all of mine set to no sound. That's typically what I would recommend for all of you here today. Keep in mind what is available, because each one of those, it'll actually let you set whatever you find for your operation that's not what I call annoying. Okay, I want it to alert me to the fact, but I don't want it to make me mad sitting in the cab. Okay. Some of our engineers think it's fun to have stuff like this, and we can come in here and yell at you, but I would prefer not to. Typically, most guys are doing some kind of a chime. Okay. Or you can do a chime higher. But if I got a tractor running, I may need it to be a little louder. I find that extremely annoying. I get tired of that. So pick out what you like. For today, I'm going to pick none. Comfortable with my sound settings. Okay? Now, let's go back. Let's just dissect the front screen. And I'm going to start here. I start a little backwards from some people. What I want to talk about is down at the bottom, you have your bar chart. That's what we call this whole category here. And you're going to notice that right now I have population set. This is what it's telling me. And if I click on this, I can see all the different things I can see on that bar chart. So depending upon what equipment I have on my planter, so right now I've got population, I've got singulation, and you can see I got a couple of rows that are causing me some headaches. I have downforce, but I don't have it pre-recorded, so I cannot show you what downforce would look like. But if I'm in the field, that's actually showing you what your downforce is. I do have good ride. I do like ride. I have vacuum. I have SRI. I have nitrogen. So if I'm running a liquid product, I can come in here. I actually have a 2-liquid system set up on this planter. I've run nitrogen through a conceal, and I'm running a starter program. My starter would be through my FurrowJet. You can see I've got a couple of issues that I wanted to be able to show what's going on this planter. You probably don't have fungicide or insecticide. You may have a weed and feed if you're spraying. I do have closing set up on this planter, but I don't have that pre-recorded, so I don't have that. If I'm controlling my row cleaners from the cab, some of you may just have the dial in the cab. You just turn the switch both ways. We can actually do that on the Gen 3 as well. So it's up to you how you have that set up. But all these will show up as what I call the bar charts down here at the bottom. Now, right now, I have everything set to manual because there's an automatic scroll page. So if I set that to scroll, I can enable that. And every 10 seconds, it's going to change. And I can come in if I don't want to see some of this information. Okay? So I can either leave them off or I can turn them on. And it's up to you what you want to see. So I always say, typically what I'd like you to probably be looking at is ride, downforce, maybe population, maybe singulation, definitely SRI, and if I'm doing liquid. The rest of them, I'm probably not going to worry about. But you can actually look at how long it's going to stay on that screen. So if I come back here and I have it enabled, we're seeing right now I got it set to closing, and that should switch if I saved it. Okay. Yeah, so I have it enabled. What did I do? And you can see we're just planting back and forth in the field here. Now, I have this planter set up. So if I come into my field and my setup, let's kind of back up a little bit here. So you can see here, basically I've got my field selected. I've got my planter system. So if I come in and I look at this, this tells me what my planter is. Once that's set up, you never really come here. And the Tonner team will help you do this when they get you set up originally. So it's not something that you're going to come to a lot. Okay. Now, when I look at the field, you notice here I have client, farm, and field. And this has to be set up for every one of you. If I'm coming out of a different system, I can bring this information in. I don't have to retype it. If I don't have it set up, if I haven't ran any monitors, we do have to set this up originally. I would encourage you to keep most of my clients the same. You can create them or you can delete them. Right now, I'm used to using default. I'm using the default farm. And these are the farms I have created underneath there. When would I ever use multiple farms? So in our operation, we have 3 of us involved. We all keep our farms totally separate from each other. So I farm with my cousin. I keep all mine under my farm. He keeps all his under his farm. That way we never have to worry about getting the information mixed up. That's the time I would use multiple farms. Some people like to have farm and then they would have different fields. Might have the back 40, I might have the 40 on the other side of the creek. You can have things like that. So it's up to you. It's a personal preference how you set this up. But like I say, once I do that, basically it's a once and a done system. And you can see right now, this is where I'm at and what I'm running. So I can run any one of these fields that we're actually running in here.
I will say too, sometimes whenever you're creating fields, maybe not always to your advantage. Do something different sometimes better than someone sometimes getting too specific on breaking things out too much, depending on how many operators are in, you don't get back in the right spot. Then you can almost
Right. So if I had to come in and replant a field, okay, do I create a new field and call it replant, back 80 replant? Or do I just take and go to that field and create a new hybrid using it may be the same hybrid and just put an R for it for a replant?
you need to make sure that whenever you go make the back, sometimes you have 4 fields in a section, call it, kind of breaking it out. Like say your farm is Brian Bonner, 4 patches. Sometimes keeping those under one field. A lot of you guys are starting, but I know sometimes we got the fields that are broken up. Don't get back to the field. Field it back. I guess my experience has been sometimes that kind of thing. Brian Bonner, track, easier to access. The other thing, Ken, while we're kind of go to the hybrids, had someone ask about wanting to clean up hybrids.
So here's where we would come. I do have this as a multi-hybrid. I apologize, but basically I can add hybrids. If I come in here to, I can actually come in and I can delete my hybrids as well. Now that I set that up, I'm sorry. Yeah, let me just keep walking through here while I'm here, and we'll get to that, okay? So hang on to that. So here from my home screen, let me just back up and hit it this way. If I click on setup, this is typically, you're going to see all the things you have on your screen. So you notice that if I have liquid, it is set up there. I have to tell it everything I'm doing, and that's what all these bars are actually showing. Now, I am a 48 row planter. So most of you are not going to be at that. I'm actually an effective row spacing of 20 inch. Most of you will be a 30 inch, okay? So however many rows, basically it's going to be looking. So here at my hybrid, that's all my hybrids. What hybrid do I have assigned to that? If I come in here, select a hybrid for that, and now I come here, I have my hybrid, it's telling me what I have on that. Now that's the field that I'm in at the present time. The field I'm in at the present time, I have nitrogen starter, and you can see I have my fungicide on this planter. Okay, if you're only using one liquid, you're only gonna have one bar here. If you're not using any liquid, you may not have any bars there. It may just be a simple, just a hybrid only at that stage. Okay. So this is kind of where I always start with. We talked through the fields. Uh, one thing I didn't point out while I was here. So this is the field I'm planting in, and you notice sometimes I started the path when we talked about replant. If I'm going to replant a whole field, and guys ask me, how do I get rid of the coverage that's already there? Because it says I've planted it, but I want to replant it. And unless I have swath shut off, it's not going to plant because it's thinking I planted it in this season. Okay. Now, once you move to a new season, so every January 1, we roll to a new season. All of last year's data is considered old crop map data. Okay, so I don't have to delete last year's data. I can, but I don't have to. Okay? But there's always going to be this button up here. Do I want to delete the coverage of that existing field? Now, if I delete that, if I'm printing off my report at the end of the year, I've lost track of which day I planted that the first time because I deleted the coverage. So, depending upon how you report your crop insurance, if you'd like to print off a computer map to say, hey, these are the days I planted, the hybrids that I planted, I'm going to tell you to keep it and rename it as a replant hybrid instead of deleting the coverage. Okay? Those are things we can do. I won't lose the data, correct. Okay. Right.
One of the big reasons we want to do it is coverage. Don't necessarily have to delete coverage. You're saying don't delete it, just name that right.
Typically, that's what I do, unless I'm replanting the whole field. As I say, it don't mean anything. The only thing I do want to track is what date I planted it originally.
When you pull up to the field, switch it in your 2630 or whatever. Switch it on here as well. So I can change those systems to that field.
So you're going to be running two different systems at both times.
Well, the one system you got to use.
You will need to switch it on both systems. So we're comfortable with fields. Products, this is basically a once and a done. So the Tonner team will help you get that set up. The equipment you have, basically the same thing. It's a once and a done. I've got seeding capabilities. I've got liquid. You can see my different liquid products. I've got granular. I've got closing wheels on this particular planter, and I'm controlling row cleaners from the cab. Now, if I'm doing something else, so I could be doing side dress, or I could be using the yield monitor, this is where we would change that at this point. Okay, and it'll switch to a whole different category at that point. For our purposes today, we're just doing planters only. I'll leave it set for that. Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind, hold on to that. So here on equipment, we've got all the different information. There's my liquid. If I come into that liquid, basically, when I go to my system and I come into the liquid, now I do have to tell it what I have, And you notice I have to tell it where I'm actually applying my liquid. So if I'm running a 2x2 starter, my assumption is you're going to be about 2 feet in front of where my seed tube exit is. So everything we base off of is based off of seed tube exits. Why do I need to know that it's 2 feet in front? When it comes to swath, I want to turn on sooner, right? So that I don't have a gap to begin with, that I'm not applying a liquid. Same thing if I have it as a trail behind. Some of you guys may be using something with attachment, with putting my nitrogen behind a row. I want my swath to be correct, not only on seed, I want it to be correct on fertilizer too. Okay? And you have that on all these different systems. If I come into like closing, it's going to tell me I've got different strategies. So if I've got row cleaners tied to it, I can make it slow response or I can make it aggressive. I would always tell you to probably stay with aggressive for most of this area. Here I'm actually tied into what I call frame mount row cleaners. So I may have a constant pressure as a minimum at all times on that row unit. Closing, row cleaners, lift switch, radar. Basically, it's telling me I'm uncalibrated. So you're going to have to make sure that gets calibrated before you go to the field. You all know we tie radar and GPS together, right? I want to go over this. So we use GPS for speed and location. Why do we have radar on a lot of our planters? When I'm changing my swath, so if I'm clutching off when I come out into the end rows, if I throttle down, if I shift down, if I don't have that set with radar as well, my GPS speed change is basically 10 times slower than radar. So my clutching, swathing will be off if I don't have radar added to these systems. Okay, now, if you run everything at the same speed, you never change your throttle, not a problem. Less of an issue to me. But I know if you're running some of my planters, if you're planting at 6, 7, 8 mile an hour, you may not want to turn around on the ends at 6, 7 mile an hour. Okay? So that's why I think that's important to be aware. If you don't have radar, we need to have that conversation. And my PDM, basically this is a once and done. Once it's set up, the Tonner team will help you get that correct. My display, same thing. Once I have that set, that's pretty well in a constant scenario for you. I do have to set up my crops. Right now I have corn on this planter. I have to tell it all this information. Tonners will help you get this correct to begin with, but you do have some prescriptions on their planters, okay? Great. So anytime I have a prescription, I'm going to challenge you. Do I set this here? So if my outside row is outside the boundary, what's going to happen to that row? It's not going to plant unless I have something set here to, now I can set it to default, which I'm going to tell it I always want a certain population, or I can actually set to whatever the rest of the planter is on the prescription. So I have a tendency to always come in here, and I have a tendency, I always pick out your average population, and you're ready to go. Now, when I talk about swath coverage here, I need to have a conversation here. Typically, once it's set, you're not going to change it. But for the first time, I want you to tell me how you want this set. So if I'm on a 30-inch row, and I have this set to what I call this half row offset. So if I have basically every row is turning on at exactly the location, right? That's what it's telling me here. Row 8, row 7, row 6. When I have this set to half row offset, I'm on 20-inch rows. When I get within 11 inches, 10 inches of that row, it's going to shut off. So my gap from this row here to that end row is going to be 11 inches. Is that what you want? Okay. If I have this set to no offset, I'm going to plant all the way up right to that first row. You're in a 30-inch row, you're going to have a seed right up to that first row. Why do I like what I call my half row or my 1 row offsets? So here I would be 20 inches back. When you swing around in your harvesting, you like to have a spot where you can see, but I don't want it to grow up in weeds, right? That's the battle I'm chasing here. So you have to decide. Typically, I always tell everybody half row offset. I want to get within 15 inches of my 30-inch row. At that stage, I'm not too worried about having weeds growing up. But as I'm walking my end rows, I can see exactly where that started at that point. Again, this is a once and done setting for most of you. So row fail. Right now, if I run out of population on row 5, it's going to jump down to my bar chart, but the rest of my screen will be showing what's going on. So if I come in here, I'm still planting. I'm going to get row fail down here, but I'm still going to see the rest of this information. If I come here to jump to home page, now when I actually quit planting, it's going to jump across the whole screen. It's going to block out the whole thing. It's going to say row failed. Which way do you like it? This is a personal preference thing for each one of you. I like bar chart because I still want to see the rest of the planter and make sure I'm not running out on multiple rows. Okay? Everybody has their preferences. Just be aware that that is there. It's available for you at that stage. But that is where we go in here to this crops tab to change that. So that's typically how I have it set. You notice on corn, I'm looking at a 300 seed to average. That is a default. You can change that to anything you want. So I'm looking at the last 300 seeds for an average. If I'm on soybeans, do I want 300? Probably not. So if I come in here, so right now I only have corn. Let's come in here and add a crop. So I'm going to add some soybeans. And now I've got soybeans. I've got to set this up. Population's 120,000. Auto prescription is what it's going to default to. I've got to set my disk. I've got to tell it which rows are active. When do I swath off? My seeds to average I have set to the 1500. Quick adjust population. If you are using prescriptions, anytime I want to change, every time I push a button, it'll add 500 seeds. If I'm on soybeans, I'm probably going to add 1,000, or I may add 2,500. Let's come back, change back to corn for what we're doing. As you can notice, it was looking for population when I was there, because I changed it to 120,000. And now my population's coming back to what my planting population is. And you can see my singulation's coming back. Now, why is it taking so long to come back? I'm looking at seeds to average, right? So when I change from corn to soybeans, I'm only planting 29,000, it was telling me I was way wrong on my soybeans. Now it's looking at my last 300 Cs to say, hey, where are you really at? You notice my singulation's back up to 99 at this point. So that's the crops tab, my diagnose tab. Basically, anytime I come in here, everything should be all green. So you're looking at this and you're saying, well, Ken, you got a problem. Let's figure out what we got going on. So I can click on any one of these. So on my seeding, basically it's looking for vacuum sensors because I said I had some vacuum sensors on it, and it's not finding them. Okay, it's not plugged in. That makes sense to me. Yep. If I come to downforce, I can't show you downforce because I don't have load sensors plugged into my monitor. Okay, I'm just running here on the floor. There's the closing system. I said I had it, but I don't have anything plugged in. There's my nitrogen, so it's telling me my liquid system's all good. I've got a rate control module. I've got the SRM, it's plugged in, and I've got row by row control on this planter. So I have it set up with V-applies. I have the same thing on starter. Okay. So I can go through every product that I have. Fungicide, I am running that on this particular planter. Insecticide, weed and feed, basically, I have a blockage sensor that I don't have activated here. In my row cleaners, it's looking for a row cleaner module that I don't have. So that's kind of my diagnose screen. There is a system schematic. So when I come here, basically it should be telling me everything again should be all green. And I'm telling you, I have on row 1, I have problems. I have something it's looking for, and it's not finding. And my PDM is white. What's it telling me? This is what I'm missing on that PDM. I got vacuum sensor it's looking for. I've got blockage sensor. It's finding the rest of the information. So if you have a problem, you call the Tonner team. They're probably going to ask you, hey, go to your system schematic and tell me what you're seeing. Is everything green? That's always one of the first things I will chase. Now, the other thing we didn't talk about here on my diagnose screen, there's a health check that allows me to come in here when I hook up to this planter, and I can run manual settings on all this equipment in the shop. So when I first hook up my planter, I don't know if you're hooked up yet or not. If you are, one of the things I want you to do is come in here. Everything should be green on diagnose screen. If it is, then I come in here and I'm going to run my tests. And it's going to tell you what I need to have. I need the tractor running, master plant switch is on, I have to have seed, and I have to have vacuum. And if I tell it to continue, it's going to come in here to this row, and it's actually going to spin these rows and look at it to see what's going on. Let's come in here, turn this back off. So at this stage, it's doing what? It's assuming, I apologize, I can't get that to quit that at this moment. Basically, it's assuming I'm running 5 miles an hour, and it's trying to plant 30,000. I'm looking at RPM on that meter. How stable is the motor? What's my voltage? What's the amperage? And what is it actually chasing at that stage? Again, that should all be green. Everything should look normal. My actual command should always match. Now this is where I got a double meter system. That's why some of these are zeros. on each row. So here's my nitrogen test. All I'm doing the same thing. What am I going to do?
Hey, Ken,
Yes.
on the back on there where it said seed is required, if they just want to run in the shop just to see if their meters and everything's connected, you do not have to necessarily put seed in and dump it on the ground. You can if you want to catch it, but the test will work. The stability might, I mean, there could be a few differences, but if you
Right.
want to see if everything's connected and running, you do not have to put seed in.
Seed would only drop it on the floor, okay? So if you wanted to confirm your SRI at that stage, I could, but I don't have to. I assume most of the testing you do in the shop, you just spin your meters.
Yeah, and a lot of these guys is you're gonna connect and make sure all systems are working and all motors are plugged in. Then you just want to run that manual test in your shop to see if everything's got voltage and running correctly. Don't feel like you have to load it with seed to run the test, even though it shows it's required. But I guess I guess I was going to clarify that.
There's probably going to be maybe 0.2 of a difference in amperage. The only thing it wouldn't catch would be if I had a vacuum seal that was rolled or something. But other than that, it would catch everything at that point. It's gonna do them all together at this stage. Okay. Now, if I'm going to put seed in it, I'm probably not going to run them all together. I'm probably just going to do certain rows. So basically, I'm going to let the other ones just spin empty. I'm going to just spin and make sure what I'm seeing underneath those 4 rows. I usually do 4 rows at a time if I'm doing that. I just use just a container and actually capture seed. I just recirculate it, just dump it in the top of the meter.
We're going to see how this goes, but we are making an attempt trying to record this so that if you guys need to look at this again, but maybe we'll try, if you guys ask questions, maybe if we want to try to repeat the question,
yeah,
so that we can get it. So if you guys want to look back at this again, that it does make sense.
Any other questions while we're here? Comfortable with health checks? Yes. Yes. Okay. Yeah, so the question is on Delta Force, when we do health check for Delta Force, it goes through and actually raises each row individually and then it lets it drop. Okay. And the question is there a way to bypass that so we could raise all the rows together? From a safety standpoint with OSHA, they will not let us do that. You didn't hear me say yes, okay?
The EPA also said you can't leak your trucks too, so.
You all run deaf and don't have issues bypassing that, right? There are certain rules that can be broke.
You don't want to answer that on the record.
I was gonna say you're recording this. Sorry, guys. It's not easy to do them all. I have had guys. Basically, we're just bypassing a few safety features. My risk is if I actually put it into a constant up, you're bypassing all your oil. That's going to heat up oil. Yep. We've had that request a lot, especially my seed corn guys. So basically here, if I'm just doing the liquid systems, it's just going to spin my pump, spin my V applies. It's going to check and make sure, it's just a quick check, right? Now, my assumption is on your liquid systems, do you have that set up so that you can hook a garden hose and flush your systems? You could do that if you don't have that, okay? We just use an adapter, make it so you plug it in. So even though I'm not going to run fertilizer, I may just doing that with water, okay? Do that out on the barnyard lot, and we can we can make sure everything's working correctly at that stage. So basically, just be aware those health checks are in here. I encourage everybody to run those. Again, basically everything should be green at this point. You do have a couple of legends down here. So basically, it's telling me what? Green working correctly. Yellow, we got a small problem. Red says it's expected, but it's not finding it. You forgot to plug a harness in. You forgot to, you got a broken wire. Something's going on that direction. White is telling me what? Unexpected. So it's seeing it, but you haven't told the monitor. So this is a setup issue most of the time. These are going to be the main factors you're going to worry about. Now there is two things here. There's what we call an event log. So it's always keeping track of what happened. And basically when I plugged in this morning, it's telling me, hey, it didn't see a row cleaner modules, and it's going to be, you're going to have that on every row because it was looking for it. I told it I had a row cleaner module on every row. Okay, so this is always a place to come. If the Tonner team calls you and you're having a problem, not unusual, we'll bring you here and ask what was, this is that pop-up and you get an event code. And I know what happens. When a pop-up comes up on your screen, what do? Okay. Sometimes you want to know, what did I say okay to? This is actually reserved or preserved in there for you at that stage. So I can always come back and find that. And then I have an advanced log. Basically, this is where I'm actually, you would only do that if you're working with the Tonner team, where we're going to come in here and actually capture data. We're seeing a problem. We're trying to identify what it is. And we'll actually, takes a lot of information. Every second, some of this information we're looking at 200 times. It's actually going to capture all that. So it's only going to run for a minute when we're doing this. But that is available, just be aware it's there. So that's my diagnose screen, and then my data tab. So here's where we actually take information out. We use this quite a bit. If I'm going to take it to a computer, if I'm going to put it on a stick, I'm going to send it to my seed people to evaluate maps. I work with a crop consultant, so I export basically my information. I can either do that through cloud or I can do it through a USB stick. There's an export, there's an import. So if I have somebody build prescriptions for me, basically I'm going to actually come in here and what prescriptions do I want to bring? Is it a seeding? Is it a liquid? Could be granular, or it could be actually creating depth files. Okay. Now here's the delete button, and you notice here is where I actually come. And the question came up earlier about hybrids. So I can come in here. That's all the hybrids I have in this system. If you have a lot of new hybrids this year, I don't have a problem telling you to go in and delete all your hybrids out before you start the season. Now I have to reactivate every hybrid that I want to plant. You can import those as well. Okay. So this is all the places we do that. You can do them all, or I can actually just do one or two hybrids. So if I have a hybrid in my system that I'm not going to use, if you're like I am, about every year there's one or two or three of my hybrids that I kick out, I'll go in and actually delete them out so they don't even show up. And my software update. So from your software update, this is where most of you are going to do this. If you noticed, I'm actually running on my screen here a 2022 software. So anytime I come into this, it's telling me what version software I'm running. In my pre-recorded, I haven't had a lot of changes from 22, 23, and 24. There's a big change from 2020 to 2021. Don't do that without talking to the Tonner team. Okay? If you're running 2023.0, you can always go to 2024. What's my advantage of going to a new software? If I'm running smart firmers, the algorithm that we build into that, we will tweak that from year to year based on information we get in. Okay? Am I changing anything on prescriptions, on seeding? No. So it's, if I ran 2023.0, it's a pretty solid software. Don't have a problem with that. Okay. Now, from the cloud, if you go out and you look at our website, you're only going to be able to download a .0 software. We do have a .1 software. The .1 is used only if you're doing new products. So typically, if you're doing any kind of a seeder, you're doing some kind of a strip till bar, or you're doing sprayers, then I would definitely have to be on a .1 software. We do have Panorama. So Panorama is actually a cloud-based system where I can show you data on your iPhone. That has to be a .1 software as well. Other than that, probably not a big need. Wasn't going to cover .1 software today. Most of you will just be on a .0. Now, yeah, and I should have covered here. I do like, so here in my account configuration, that's your client farm field, your vehicles, your measurements. So like in my GPS measurements, I'm always going to have to tell me where the hitch is located, where the seed tube exits are. If I export that, I can put that onto a USB stick. I have the same thing for device. That's my implement, the vehicle, crop product settings. These two and my display, my dashboard and my sound. I would tell you, I want you to export all three of these onto a USB stick. Take and put it into the armrest of your tractor if you got one of those that open up. Reason I'm saying, every year there's at least one grower calls me and says, something happened. I lost my display. I don't have to go out and remeasure and re-enter all this information. I just shove the stick in, we put a new display in, and away we go. Okay? I would encourage everybody, if you don't do it, you'll be the one guy that has the problem. Okay? Yes, we've had lightning strike tractors. Yes, we've had all kinds of weird stuff for whatever reason. So those three, I think, are very critical. My prescriptions, you would still have your original, probably of what you did. Boundaries, I don't know if I like boundaries if I'm on an RTK system. While we're here, I need to probably talk about, let me come back here. If I come up here at the top, so you can see right now, I'm running off of GPS. So there's my GPS communication. I'm looking at my NEMA strings. These three are critical. If you're on an RTK, you're going to be a minimum of a 5, maybe a 10. It's going to tell me my GPS stability, tells me my radar's uncalibrated. I'm going to tell you, with the sunspot activity we have going on this year, if you're just on a WAS system, there could be some glitches in GPS this year. Okay, the last year and this year both, we're anticipating high sunspot activity that goofs up WAS signal more so than an RTK. Just be aware that's, if you call me someday and tell me, hey, my GPS isn't working, first thing I'm going to ask you is to come here and tell me what you're seeing. How many satellites are you seeing? If I've got sunspot activity going on, how many? I need a minimum. I would tell you a minimum of 8. I really want you closer to the 12. Okay? Just be aware that that could be an issue.
While we're talking about the NEMA strings there, Ken, guys that are running the John Deere systems, if you have a 2630 or 4640, whatever. And on your, depending on which globe you have, if you change globes, and on your display in your serial port on your John Deere, you have to have those 3 NEMA box checked before it'll export it. So if you're good and you decide you want to go change globes and you get in back into your planner and you don't have GPS, there's a really good chance that on your John Deere system, under your serial ports, those 3 NEMA strings are not checked. So they will not communicate it over. So if you don't have GPS, that's one thing to consider.
Yeah, almost all the time we're tying into an existing GPS system, right? So I need them to be outputting the signals that I need. And these are the 3 that we have to have. If you ever forget, you can come here and it'll tell you which ones you're looking for. Yes.
I was told that there's a way.
Yeah, so the question is, if we lose GPS, basically it blanks out. Can we go back to a manual mode? Yes, we can. I always tell everybody I probably prefer you just, if you've got radar tied in, just run off your radar. That way when GPS comes back on, it'll automatically find it. Whereas if I go in and change the setting, my risk is I don't know when it comes back online. Yeah, so basically if I'm going to like a radar, I would be accurate. It's just I lose location in the field. Okay, so my swath is going to work fine. Everything's going to still continue to work. It's going to paint as I plant. Basically, I don't lose anything other than if I'm doing boundary prescriptions. So if I'm doing a prescription rate, I am going to have to go to manual. So if I'm in manual, so like here right now on my seeding, I'm in manual right now, but if I was running prescription, says I don't have one set up for that field, but basically I can tell it what population I'm running. And it's always looking for that. Right, right. Correct, correct. It's going to work off my sides, yes. It's not going to work on my end rows, okay? But it is going to work on my sides. Now you can come in here, you can actually swath automatic or manually too, right? I can come in and I can turn those on or off, or I can actually just drag those, either one. Just take your finger and run that on the screen. I have a tendency to always stay on automatic. Now you see I have 32, 29, 35 set up in here. I do have a tendency to plug in a set population on all these. Okay, right now I got them set to zeros. What's my risk? If I don't have a population set on all these, I come in and I go to manual and I accidentally bump this. Guess what? You're not going to plant any corn. And you're going to call Tonners and say, well, it quit. Okay. What is it commanding it to do? It's commanding it to zero population. So a lot of times I'll put in a 32,000 on every one, and then I'll set my 3 or 4 areas where I'm actually looking for something different. What is this? So when I talk about a set point here, so if I come in here, I said I'm going to use 32,000 for my averages. Now let me just do that quick for you. So I've got capability to run quite a few different set points. Why would I have something different here? And how much different does that need to be? So basically, if I'm running on my home screen, I'm turning around. I know none of you guys would ever plant this slow, right? He's running 3 mile an hour when he's turning. Since that's pre-recorded, I can't speed him up, but I know none of you will drive 3 mile an hour when you're turning around. But when I get ready and I start to apply again, my screen for population, I expect to stay green, and it will if I'm planting one of the 3 set points that I had different than 32,000. Three mile an hour is just creeping, isn't it? It wasn't unusual when I was a kid. We planted 3 mile an hour. So basically, I'm looking for 32,000. If I'm within 1,000 seeds of that 32, so from 31 to 33, that is going to be green. Here's 31.8, 31.9. I am green. I'm saying I'm okay. If I'm outside of that range, I'm off by more than 1,000 seeds, it's going to flash that yellow at me. It's telling me I have a problem on row 23. If I click on that population, let's have this conversation. What do I have going on here? I've got what, 6 rows that I'm overplanting on. Why? If I come in and I click on it, so all my screens I can dial down, right? If I dial into that row, it's telling me what? Population's 33, my singulation's pathetic, 95, but I've got 4% doubles. Okay? If I'm seeing doubles on a row, what's the question I need to be asking? If I'm running BSET meters, what do we know? I've got a singulator in here that I bumped the seed, right? Three times from the top, 2 or 3 times from the bottom, whether it's a classic or whether it's a VSET 2. As I bump the seed, I'm relying on vacuum to bring the seed back on. If I'm holding 2 seeds, what do I think I have going on? Too much vacuum. So the first thing I'm going to do is back down my vacuum by 2 pounds, 3 pounds. Okay. Now, do I still see doubles on those rows, or do I start to get skips on other rows? I'm going to change. I got to change it on whatever side. Now, you notice what I have here. So typically, on a 48 row, I would have 3 vacuums. I would have 3 sections, and I have a problem on every section. So pretty good chance it's probably not just when it's just one row. Okay, pretty good chance it's not just a issue with a vacuum. Pretty good chance it's actually a worn out singulator. Got a bunch of them. Okay, I can show you more when I have bad problems on a planner. That's why we use this planner for that reason. Now, the other thing I have in here, notice my legend. So right now I'm looking from 29 to 35. So 32 is my target. If I come in here to my legend, if I change this to 200%, and you notice I'm at 35,000 right now. So basically I tighten up my legend, and I get closer to that bar at that point. So all the legend is doing is telling me, hey, I'm going to look, but what's my, I don't want a 40. All it's doing is changing the parameters of what I'm seeing in that legend. And I can do this for population, I can do it for singulation, I can do it for SRI, I can do it for all my liquid systems. Basically, it's how big of a range do you want to see? Okay, if I leave this at 100%, let's come back in, change that to 100. Basically, so of a 32, it's allowing me basically 1,000 each direction. It's actually hard to see how far off I am at this point, right? So that's why I use legends like I do, and I'll have usually a 200 to a 400 because I like my bar chart to show me that when I'm running on that planner. If I come in and I look at my nitrogen, so here I'm running liquid, 10 gallons my target, and you can see I'm bouncing by what, maybe a quarter of a gallon as I'm running through the field row to row to row. And I have the same thing. I can change this legend. Now I'm getting a little better look, but I'm always wanting to know how accurate am I at any given time. So it's whatever you're comfortable seeing on these legends, right? I always tell everybody, I don't have a particular rule of thumb. I just want to be able to have a good look when I'm scrolling through there. My SRI on this unit, okay? So here I'm looking across my SRI. I'm sitting down here at a 10. I would love for all of you to be an SRI of 10. Do we understand what SRI is? Okay. It's what we call seed release index. Okay, so I'm looking at every seed going past my seed tube sensor. If I've got a standard seed tube, I'm 18 inches above the bottom of the ground. If I'm a speed tube, I'm actually looking in the speed tube. I know I'm going to be a much tighter SRI. But if I'm telling you I have a 10 SRI, so if I am planting 34,000 in a 30-inch row, I don't have my chart in here. If I have 34,000 and I know that 10 SRI is 10%, okay? So if I'm planting 6-inch spacing, 10% of 6 inches is a 0.6. So from 5.4 to 6.6 is where every seed is landing in the ground. That's where I would love to have you. What happens if I get outside of that? Say I go 5 inches to 6 inches to 7 inches. SRI is climbing at that point. Okay? So I can't always control SRI. What I'm telling you is I'm averaging within 10. I definitely want you within 15. Okay? So I would love to have you an SRI of 15 or below. The rougher the ground, what happens to the row unit? More bounce, higher SRI. That seed going past that seed sensor is doing more variation. The higher the variation, the higher the SRI. If I go to John Deere, they're going to tell you anything under 20 is considered acceptable. You're not going to plant on my farm at a 20. Okay? So Wave Vision, we've done what? We've gone closer to the ground. It's going to be harder to keep that SRI at a 10. You might have to live with a 12, 13 at that point. Because any bounce variation in that seed as we're going through the field, we're changing the distance from seed to seed variation. That's why I believe that. Now, the other side of this is my no-tills are probably going to have a little higher SRI than my conventional because I have a rougher ride on that row unit. My faster speed planters, if I don't have speed tube, are going to have the same thing. So that's why when I first came with this metric 10 years ago, we were actually saying, hey, I could actually tell you how fast I can plant a field. Because I had some fields I could plant at 4.5 miles an hour and some fields I could plant at 6. Just what I'm really telling you is how much rough ride. So just because the row unit goes up and down doesn't mean I have a bounce in the row unit. The bounce is when I have rapid acceleration or deacceleration of the seed in that seed. We comfortable with SRI? I think it's a great tool. Now I do show you ride also. That will be a direct correlation to where you measured in the seed tube. Okay, so on wave vision, I'm measuring basically 1.5 inches off the ground. It's almost like speed tube at that point. I'm pretty confident what you're seeing there is what it's going to be in the ground. On my seed tube, you're still got 18 inches, 12 inches, you got to drop after that seed sensor. So if you reported to me it was good the day you planted, it wasn't coming up out of the ground, then I'm going to ask what happened. Either I had a variation, I had a seed tube that was actually broke on the bottom, or a curl of plastic that was actually affecting the seed after that point, did not get into the trench, or my bar was running downhill, which allows a seed tube. So if I take a seed tube sitting in a row unit like this, if I tip the bar forward, seed tube comes up on the bottom, what happens to seed coming down the bottom? It's going to have a tendency to actually come out and roll when it lands on the ground. Okay? So maintenance issues always say, first off, I want to make sure bar is always level. I don't care what your hitch is, bar has to be perfectly level or a little bit uphill. Never allow that to tip down, because that affects my seed coming out of that seed tube tremendously. Now, SRI is also a direct correlation to what I call standard deviation. You guys probably don't utilize that much, but most of my engineering team, we measure what percentage we're off. That is standard deviation. Okay? A 10 will be a 1 standard deviation. Yes? So in soybeans, it becomes much harder. Okay? Just because of the higher population, I cannot give you an accurate indicator of where that needs to be. If I'm in a 15-inch row, sometimes I can give you an SRI. Once I get above 28, I lock out. I do not show you singulation. I cannot show you SRI accurately at that stage. And basically, my seeds are so fast coming past that sensor, I just lose that capability. If I go into 15-inch rows or 20s, so I run on 20s, I actually see singulation part of the time. Depends upon how smooth I am. But I actually change my SRI. So right now it is set to 20. We will actually change that to 28 if I'm on a 15 or a 20-inch row planter.
I'm going to jump in just real quick as we talk about an SRI of a 10. I agree with Ken that that's a good goal. Do not panic when you get in your field and you start planting and you're running a 13 or 14. Don't panic and think there's something wrong. But it is a process that we have to start thinking of, how do we keep improving that. So like when you guys bring meters to our shop and we run them on a test stand, everything's set still. It's not hard to run a 9 or a 10. But as you get into field conditions, if everything's smooth and you've got everything worked great and the planter's really running real smooth, you're going to run lower. If you are if you're just roughing the ground 1 inch or 2 and you're trying to run 6 miles an hour and you've got some chatter in your row unit, possibly some parallel arms getting worn, there's a lot of things that can affect what happens. So singulation, you might singulate 100% on all your seed all day long. That doesn't necessarily mean because the meter's singulating it that you're dropping it perfectly to the ground too. So that's kind of that connection between, we can singulate real well. So I think sometimes guys think my singulation is 100%, let's keep speeding up. There's also the handoff that if you're not on speed tube and you don't have a delivery system in that in that tube, you have to think through, okay, SRI is helping me determine what's happening when the meter releases it it gets to the ground. And so there's a lot of variables that are going to affect it. That 10% is the goal, but you have to start looking at, okay, if I'm at a 15 or a 16, what's happening that I'm not at 11 or 12? Is it because, yes, my row cleaners are out here trying to clean clods away that the field cultivator created, and I'm sending a lot of vibrations back up into the row? There's a lot of variables that hit it. So start thinking like, okay, I can singulate. SRI is going to start helping me determine how well I'm delivering. And then we have to kind of determine what you need to do to fix those issues. And like I said, parallel linkage, there's a lot of other variables that can affect how that all plays into the picture.
No, that's a great point. And let's take that a step farther, because I always say there's two parts to a corn planter, right? I meter it, I have to deliver to the ground. They are totally independent of each other. So everything we're doing with SRI is delivery to the ground. And to your point, whether I'm using a frame mount row cleaner or whether I'm using a row mount row cleaner, think of the vibration. Vibration affects SRI, affects good ride. Okay, I can show you all the time when I look at, we run accelerometers in our SRMs. So I'm measuring how smooth row unit rides, right? That's what my good ride number is here. That accelerometer is looking how much movement am I getting going through the field. And there's a direct correlation from good ride to SRI. And I can tell you that I can improve your SRI probably by 2% to take it off of a row cleaner off the row unit and move it to the frame. Okay, it's just taking vibration away at that stage. Yes. I can tell you there's a difference in standard deviation. Okay. I can tell you that I've set for a higher yield potential. I can't guarantee you will always achieve a higher yield potential. And what I mean by that is if I have a flex hybrid and it's going to compensate, we all know some of our flex hybrids, if I have a skip, the ear on each side will compensate for that some. I have the same thing depending upon my hybrid selection, how that's going to affect yield. I can tell you there's some yield. I can't tell you is that a bushel or is that 3 bushel. It's going to depend upon hybrid as well. Correct. All I'm trying to do is set higher yield potential is all I'm really chasing. I got to have the environmental conditions to go with it. And that is hard to put a number to. And that's why if you look at our PTI data, so our research farm, we call the PTI farm, basically, why do we want a minimum of 3 years of data? Because I just know environmental conditions will have enough variable. If I win 3 out of 3, I'm very confident to make you a statement at that point. Okay. And to the point, right? So as we talk this SRI, if I'm running a cable drive on a John Deere planter, I may be an 18. Okay, I'm still going to have good yield, but could it be a little better is really what it comes down to. And where we first started chasing this was when I was going from chain drives. I could tell you when you had bad chains. If I had a chain link that was causing, or a cup in the sprockets, is where I first started to notice my SRI. And that's how we started chasing this at that point. That was really why we went into electric drives, was to eliminate chains and drive shafts and bearings and things like that. Great point.
Okay, I'm going to jump in just real quick again while we're talking on a few maintenance things here. And I am going to, if you don't mind, I might put a couple of you guys on the spot here, but Todd back here, you've been running speed tube, right? So your SRI typically would be, do you know a number that? So Todd, I'm sorry. So I don't know if you heard, he's kind of in that 8, 9, 10. So again, the meter handed it off, it's singulating well, but it's taking it to the ground without variables affecting it. Bobby, what would you say would be a SRI for you, or do you have that off? That you, so, and again, everybody's different. I just know a few of the growers here, and Bobby would be the type that would probably have your ground worked ahead, and you're taking your time and making sure you're not speeding up too much. So you kind of have one end to the other where you have a controlled delivery. Bobby is controlled on maybe really taking his time to work the ground and run smooth, and yet there's a difference in how those delivery systems work. So that's what I want you to think about. The other thing I think whenever you see corn coming out of the ground, there's a couple other variables that you need to stop and think about too. One would be your ketons. If you've got a keton that does not have a flat bottom on it and it's got a point on it, when it runs to hit the seed and to firm it to the ground, instead of firming it, you might be flipping it to the side and moving it a little bit. So there's some things like your seed firmers, your seed tube guards. If you don't have a clean, if your seed tube guard at the bottom is starting to get worn, and your trench is starting to narrow up at the bottom, and you're not landing your seed at the bottom, there's some mechanics that I guess I would say before you look at your SRI and you look and say, well, I ran 100% singulation. My SRI was this, but it didn't come up right. Make sure you take care of mechanics before we get all caught up in the technology side of things, because we can deliver and meter a seed, but if you've got a keton that has, instead of being flat, it's pointed, things aren't going to necessarily work the same. So I guess don't let common sense dominate what maybe you're seeing on the monitor at times, and maybe you can add to that. But there's a difference in, you can just see from these two guys that I know are kind of different ends of the spectrum are seeing different results. So it's a tool to help you try to figure out what's happening on your farm and what decisions to make to try to keep improving it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly where we got to land at this stage. And you know, even if I'm running an 18 or a 19, am I going to push in the clutch? No, I'm going to run all the way until I get above a 20, 21, probably. Okay. I think getting corn in the ground is more important than anything else. Depending upon the time of year, right? I'm not talking if you're planting next week, but that's a different conversation. Uh, so yes, it's a part of what I want to bring out. I want to show you that it's here. What are you going to do with it? Okay. And that's why I will never allow anybody to run two planters side by side and do a comparison between them. How I have a meter sitting on a row unit, how it actually drops seed down through the seed tube, I cannot guarantee they're exactly the same. Will not happen. So when a guy comes to me and says, well, my neighbor got this, my yields aren't as good as my neighbor, I'm like, so if we're not using the same planter, I really can't compare at that stage, because I have actually taken a row unit. Do we want to go here? And I started this, so we work with some of the Farm Journal people, right, with Missy and with Ken Ferry, and we actually were working on a planter that Missy and Bill Bauer up in Coldwater, Michigan, they had ran for years. It's a Kinsey planter. We put smart firmers on this, and we were looking at the uniform furrow. And we had one row that was always radically different than the other rows. And they ran all season trying to figure out, well, obviously the smart firmer was wrong, is what their conclusion was. And we finally figured out what happened was when they bolt that row unit up to the bar, there's a little bit of an angle. As that angle sits, does that affect how I'm actually looking at creating a seed trench? Because it's got my one disc opener pushing dirt a little farther one way than the other one. And we were seeing that on SRI. How that meter turns on a row unit that's sitting just at a little bit of an angle affects that at that stage. So it's things like that we're like, how do you wrap your arms around things like this, right? These are the things we chase. But anytime I'm working with somebody that's doing plots, I want everything to be perfect, or otherwise we get skewed data. Okay, so that's why we work with those folks as much as we do. Is I want to make sure that the data that they're publishing in Farm Journal is always accurate.
And I wanted to, the reason I started bringing this up is there's a few of you guys that this is new to you guys. Don't panic if you get out in the field and you see an SRI of a 13 or 14 and think that you're going to have a terrible stand. You're really doing a good job yet. You have a whole vast amount more of information than we've ever had before. So as we gather some of this information, it's for next year, the year after. Don't panic if you don't, then you start your planner and everything's going good and you see you're running a 12. Don't think that you're doing a bad job. It's kind of where I was going with the whole bringing this thing up. There's a lot of variables to help you make decisions in the future that you don't necessarily, you may not get it all nailed down on the first year. We're diving in pretty deep.
And even year 4, year 5, right? I mean, I got some fields where I'm playing with cover crop. It's not unusual. My SRI is a 14, 15 pretty consistently, whereas in my conventional fields, I'll be 11, 12.
I had a variety last year that come to us, and it was I think it was 35 or 36 pound seed. I took it in the shop. I tried playing with popcorn seed discs. I tried playing with all kind of things, and at a certain point, I couldn't get it any better than an 18 SRI, just because, I mean, there was so much variation in the seed that I was planting like a 98.5% singulation, playing with different discs. I mean, there's some extremes that, yeah, you're going to jump outside of certain boundaries, and it still was 230, 40 bushel corn. It wasn't like it dropped 160 or 70 bushel corn. So,
yeah, and to your point on that, right? If I'm looking at seed, and we've done a lot of what I call high-speed camera capture of seed coming down through a seed tube. The amount of graphite that's on a seed will affect how it actually drops through that seed tube. Sometimes you'll get a seed that'll tumble going down through the seed tube. So the shape of the seed, and that's to your point, right? Certain lot numbers will plant different than a different lot number. Still the same variety, same hybrid, okay? These are the things we try to wrap our arms around. But it's a matter of do the best you can in the scenario you're in.
we will quick take about a 5-minute break if you guys want to grab another water, hit a restroom, whatever, and we'll try to get back up here in just a few minutes.
You can see while we took a break, grower kept planting corn. Like I said earlier, we got a couple of maps up here. There's going to be a default. Typically you're going to have a standard. This is kind of a default. Whatever you have set up, you're allowed to program this however you want. You notice right now what I'm looking at on this particular field, I'm actually looking at a single map, and it's taken a fair amount of my screen space to do that. You can set that up for what I call split screen. So right now we're just looking at a single singulation, just pass to pass. Even though I got a 48 row, I'm taking a swath coverage of half, so it looks like I'm going through the field with every other pass. If I switch this into split, now you can see I can look at singulation and I can look at population. You can actually come in here and change this whatever you want to see. So maybe you want to look at nitrogen. Okay, it'll take a little bit for that to map up. Basically, it's just a nitrogen coverage on a row by row. Anytime I change that, it's got to wait long enough to get all my information back in. So basically on my good ride, all I'm doing is looking at the accelerometers in every row unit, every SRM would have an accelerometer in it. And in that, we're actually looking how much movement, how much shake do I have going on at any given time.
So 100% means no shake?
It would. Now keep in mind, when I recorded this, I did not have an accelerometer in it. So it's going to default to 100 automatically.
What does that mean? What range?
I would like that to be in probably a 95. Okay. Understanding if I have a no-till with a cover crop, probably 85 to 90 is as good as you're going to get, just because I know I'm going to have more row unit bounce out there at that stage. Now you notice here, when I come in here, I've got the chart I can turn on or off. I'm looking skips, doubles. Remember, I had a couple of rows where I was having my doubles, and that's exactly what you're seeing going through here. If I come in here and I'm looking at my nitrogen, basically it's giving me a chart, and I can actually slide that bar wherever I want that. I'm looking at 10 gallon. I like to have things set for where I want. So I'm going to come in here probably and set to my 10 gallon. I want to be green. There I went to yellow. It'll just change everything that I've recorded so far. But if I come in and I click on that, I can actually tell you what my high, what my low, where that bar is going to be, or I can just drag it like what I was just doing. Either one of those is possible. So I don't know where you're going to run. I got a lot of growers run here in standard because I can see two maps. If you're tied in with FieldView, maybe you're seeing your maps on an iPad instead. You're welcome to do that. And then I'm probably going to look at more information on my home screen on my Gen 3. Yeah, so on large map, so basically you're seeing map only at this stage. Again, I can have that as split or I can have it as a single. Right, right. So it's showing you every row, what's going on. Now in this, you've got a couple of different settings. If you'd like to use this, you can actually see there's my whole field view. So that's how much we planted since I plugged in here this morning. Or you can come in one more notch. Or I can jump right into the tractor and follow that either way. And then I have what I call horizon view. So there's what I call small horizon or large horizon. I don't use this a lot. Some people like it. I always tell everybody it's up to you. What do you want to see? And I have a tendency to look at maps. I use maps either on an iPad or I'll use a second screen and put my maps on the second screen. So you can see, like I said earlier, I got kind of a busy planter set up here. I don't think spacing's real valuable. There's field acres. If I come in here and I can change any one of these. So here I'm looking at fur moisture. If I had smart firmer, if I want to change that, I can come here where we add widgets. So every one of you has capability to customize every screen. Okay. So here's that metric. As I'm going to edit this, basically I can either get rid of what's there or I can just add new widgets to it. And I've got a number of information I can add on here. So here's the different metrics, and you notice I got different boxes. So let me go back. Notice I have boxes set up on here. So that's two boxes. That could be one metric by itself, like I have here with clean furrow, or it could be like field acres where I've got two boxes used up. These are actually two boxes going up and down, what they call the vertical. So if I come in here and I look at this widget, here's that small box, a single box. There's the wide, which is too horizontal or too tall. But if I click on these, sometimes it's different information. Sometimes it's just a matter of what do you want to see. And you can scroll up or down on what all you have in there. And there's my large boxes. So typically we keep population fairly large. We keep singulation fairly large. Quite a bit of the other we may have a little smaller. Or then they have what they call the extra large. So it's just a matter of what you want to see. You set it the way you want. Okay. So if I take this furrow moisture, I can put here. I can add another one for my smart firmer. I can look at uniform furrow. Now, after I've done that, I have to click this check mark to save it, or otherwise it will disappear. So if I click on that, that puts it on my front screen. And that would be the information I would be seeing. You notice on here, I'm running liquid. You have capability to come in here, and I'm actually looking at how much nitrogen do I have on that planter. If I come to my control page, so I always like to set up what I call an extra map. So if I want to come in here, I can set up my own page exactly the way I want it customized to me as an operator. I can set up all my controls on one page. And if you notice in here, I have some nitrogen on this planter. If I click on that, here's where I would come in and actually tell you how big the tank is. So I've got a 750 gallon tank. I can either come in here, I can fill it. That just added 750 gallon. Or I can come in here and maybe I only put 500 gallon in. And you notice it tells me it's partially full. If I go back to my home screen and I come back to here, I've got 498 gallon because I've been applying 10 gallon an acre. And my nitrogen, I've got 50 acres available still that I can plant corn. So it'll just count down, it'll keep track of that, it'll tell you how close you are to getting empty. So I can come in here, I can do the same thing for my starter. And I'm going to put 400 gallon in. Now I can also select what I have in that. So if I'm taking a starter and I have a 1034O, oh, I need gallons. I clicked on the wrong one. I'm sorry. Basically, I want like a 5 gallon. Come on. Or say like a 3.5 gallon. Depends on your rate. Now, I can also come in here and I can actually customize what I'm actually going to see. I can add another product. So I can add a quart. And I have capability to add different products in that. So if I create this new mix, and I want to call this my starter, so I can run here my 1034O. So if I use different suppliers, I don't have anything built in here. So I can build different parts of it. And then always got to tell it how many gallons or how many pounds I'm going to add into that. So you have capability to keep track of that as you're running and chase it that direction. It's all whatever you want, you have capability to do. Back on this large map. You can actually zoom in close if you want to dial in and you're trying to figure out, hey, I got something going on. I can dial in pretty tight to that, or I can back out. Like we said earlier, you can actually come out and go to the whole field at that stage. I don't use this. I know some of my growers do. Totally up to you at any given time how you set this up. I'm going to have a tendency to run here at this point. Now you also notice up here, anytime I've got, this keeps track of any of my alerts since I actually started for the day. Okay, and it's telling me I set up smart firmers. I told it I had one on every row, so I've got an error for every row because I don't have all my units in there. If I dismiss it, they're gone. So if I was running now and I came in here and basically I had any kind of a pop-up, if you hit OK, it's going to show up as a red. It's going to give you an alarm. I can always go back and see what actually popped up at that stage. What haven't we covered? We've got a lot of things. I wasn't going to get into a lot of detail one-on-one. I'd rather handle those one-off. But if you have general questions, I'd certainly like to chase it at this point.
Ken, I think if you don't mind, why don't we go to the save load feature? And
The what?
Save load feature, as far as these guys saving their planner settings on their for saving their planner and their tractor configurations on the monitor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so here under my data mode,
Is it under the equipment, the save load button? Or am I thinking wrong?
yeah. So I've got two different planters loaded in here. If you have a 15-inch row that you plant corn and soybeans on, a lot of times I'm going to save it as two different configurations. Okay. Now I can switch crops, but when I switch crops, it's gonna. I know that what do I have to do? If I'm going to run soybeans and I got 15-inch, I've got a different configuration setting. I actually just want to save that here at this point.
Is anybody using this for yield in the combine? So we'll want to make sure that you're saving your planner settings and your tractor settings before you reboot and go over to the yield side of things. So it's not a bad practice once you have all your, and we'll usually save them, but if you have your clutches, you have different things timed and it's set up, or if you go make any changes, it's not a bad idea to come and just resave your settings so that if you do switch out or software or something, whatever, it's kind of a quick backup to reload your settings again too on here. So you can load, pull back up what you have, or else you can save what you have in the tractor planner tab. The other thing maybe too while we're here, Ken, is a lot of you guys, the GPS offset check, we'll help dial things in, but some of you guys that are used to running the system we may not come back out again to get you set up and started. This is always a good thing in the spring to, in some fashion, make sure that your tractor measurements, your planter measurements, nothing got changed. This is an easy way to go back in and see if what your GPS says and what you have loaded on your tractor planter measurements are the same. Or make sure you ground truth it on your end rows when you start planting.
Yeah, so like if I come in, I can just go out. If I got a fairly big lot, I can do it right next week, right? I can come out here. Basically, I'm going to drop 2 flags right where my seed tube exit is. And then when I click on that continue, it just tells me go far enough that I'm coming back through. I'm going to drive back through on the same AB line coming through that barnyard. And when I come, I want to stop with my seed tube right at the same location as to where, so it's really helpful to have 2 people to do this. And when I stop, now I'm going to basically hit continue, and it's going to tell me my distance between GPS and center of the tractor. So did anything change on the tractor? No, I'm dead on. But you're noticing here on my, something changed between, and it's always going to tell you what, right? So A is what? Well, I'm looking at my receiver plus my distance from here to here plus C. Something changed in this scenario, and it's telling me I'm off. Guess what? You're going to have a swath issue at this stage. That needs to be within a couple inches. Now, what has happened? And I know for a lot of you guys, either you may have taken that planter tractor, put it on an auger wagon. Did something get changed when you did that? Okay. This is just a quick way to verify. Maybe I'm using a different tractor. Now I need to come in and redo all my information. So here where we were actually on the offset check, I need to verify, is my tractor measurements correct? Okay, and this shouldn't change from year to year. And I have the same thing with my planter measurements. So depending upon what style planter I am, a lot of you have what I call center trailer. My back rows have a different seed tube exit than this style here. And at that stage, once I've corrected that, now I'm ready to come back in and redo my offset check. And you notice that changed that drastically, but I'm still off. So now I need to figure out, where's my distance? Is my pivot point wrong? Did I get something different here at this stage? If you ever have a question on it, basically we need to take and, it's going to ask me, do I want to test again? If I ask for recommendations, it's going to say what? It's using what you entered. It's using the calculated distance. And it wants to know why am I different? Common acceptable differences are less than 12 inches. Comfortable with that? You guys that aren't necessarily going to have Connors come out and help you, I want you to double check this. I really want it within 2-3 inches. Not unusual. If I do it once, I'm going to turn around and do it twice, and I'm going to split the difference. Because sometimes when I push in the clutch and that tractor rolls a little bit or try to stop right at the right point, sometimes you're off a little bit anyhow.
So with that said, then we want to go ahead and show them where they can adjust their start-stop times, if any of you guys need to do that.
Yeah, so typically this is what the first thing I walk through. I really like to double check, make sure you have this. I'm always going to double check, make sure you've got this correct. And I'm wanting to verify before I start changing anything. I really want to make sure if I'm using the same tractor, the same planter, and I'm hooked up the same, we shouldn't be changing. Okay. So did I change the location of where I had that receiver mounted? Did I use a different receiver? So those are the questions I start asking. Um, yeah, hang on. Got to think through a minute where that's at. So my stop start offset. So it's pretty well going to tell you what you need to know. To start or stop sooner, increase the value. So the question becomes, how much do I increase? It's good. It's always in inches, okay? And a lot of times guys will get confused and think that's in feet. My Gen 2s used to be in feet, okay? So if you're coming from one system to another, just keep that in mind.
If for some reason, whenever you dig and you're off 15 inches, make sure that you didn't, and you want it right against the end, make sure you didn't go from full coverage to half row off before you change it 15 inches. You shouldn't have to be making big adjustments at this stage. The red flag should jump up if you're starting to change this 20, 30 inches. This is to fine tune. If you want to be dropping 6 inches from your end rows and you're at 10, you want to move it a couple inches one way or another.
Yeah, you can put in positives and negatives here. So just keep that in mind, right? And here's the other thing I want to tell you. I have stop and start as two separate items. If I come into a field and I come into my end row, so I always want to verify, tie up a closing wheel, plant a little seed on one or two rows, plant one way, come in at a 90-degree angle. How close are you? If I'm set to a half row offset, I should be 15 inches off, right? So now my question becomes, if it looks like I'm shutting off too soon, I'm going to have you turn around, come back, and come in the other way. And I want to know, do I start the same amount of distance too late? If it is, it's not a stop-start seating delay. It's actually my distance in my hitch is actually off at that stage. So just because I put a tape measure in it, I plug in the number, doesn't mean that's always the right number. Okay, so at this stage, I would come back in before I would go here, and I would come back to my to the other side of this. What else haven't we talked about? Roll through here.
I'm sure you guys are going to remember, but remember the good old safety feature when you guys start up for the day, or you move down a field or something, and you get pulled into the field and it says that you can't plant. You have to take your master switch, toggle it off and on 3 or 4 times to get it to kick into gear. Safety feature again. If it tells you that nothing's working and it's basically, what does the pop-up actually say, Ken? I don't know if I remember. It's not going to let you plant. Basically, if you pull up, if you start the monitor up in the morning, sometimes even if you, is it transporting down the field?
Yeah, if you transport down the road, anytime you go above, I think it's 14 mile an hour, it's not unusual, it's going to kick off because it doesn't want to accidentally start turning meters for you at that stage.
So when you pull into the field, you have to take the master switch, which some of you guys that have the new monitors don't have it. It'll be the bottom box here, the bottom side is your master switch. If you toggle that 3 or 4 times, it'll kick it out of the safety gear.
Hold that up again, Brian. So there you notice what we have on there is basically 5 switches, right? You got one on the far left, that's the master plant. You got one on the far right, which is your swath. So if I'm ever in that field, I want to replant or I want to back up, if I turn swath off, basically all the rows are going to turn at that stage. If I leave swath off and I ran out of corn for a strip, okay? So if I'm running through the field and I actually run out of corn on row 7, what do I want to do? Pick up, back up 10 feet. If I set down and go forward, it's going to say, hey, there's no seed here. It didn't plant, so it's actually going to start dropping that one row 7 until all the rows start to kick in when I cross that line. Okay, now the other thing, there's 3 buttons in the center. That's typically left, right, and center section. The outside 2 buttons of the center. So left and right is what we call auto load. So there's a feature in here where I can actually spin my meters. It's actually going to spin until it sees 3 seeds. So if I pull into a field, what do? We auto load our meters. It's going to spin until 3 seeds drop. And if it tells you auto load failed, what's it telling you? Probably that when you got off, you checked that meter, you forgot to hook the vacuum hose back up. It spun the other meters. It saw everything on 24 rows, but row 24, we actually forgot to hook the vacuum hose up. So row 24 failed at that stage. So you can go back through your auto load feature again at that point.
Back to the safety mode real quick. Quick way to tell if you're in safety mode. So if you look at your control buttons, so he would have seating in the bottom right corner and downforce. So if currently they say disabled, which means you have physically turned them off and you have to go through and re-enable them. If safety mode engages, that disabled there where downforce is will say safety mode. That's another quick way of like, hey, my planter won't plant. Well, if you look there, so starter, nitrogen, seeding, downforce, all there at the top, I'm going to call that a control button because you can tap that to go in and change your settings. But those will all say safety mode. That's a real quick way. So at that point, toggle your master up and down 2-3 times, and they'll all go back to looking like this. So quick tip, I guess, for the safety mode. But back to Ken.
Yeah, I have a tendency to put all my controls on one page. I don't know how you do that. You noticed here on this metric page, anytime I have a control page, you notice there's always a black and then there's actually another area. So that everything has to be activated on your planter. If I have hydraulic downforce, I've got to activate my downforce when I pull into the field. I've got to do the same thing for seeding. I've got to do the same thing for if I've got nitrogen, if I've got closing wheels, if I've got row cleaners, okay? And there's another feature in here we call quick start. I don't know how many of you utilize this. Basically, that quick start's going to stay active when it counts down. So right now, if I back into a corner, it's telling me in 2 seconds it's going to start to spin. I need to drop the clutch, and basically that meter is turning at 3 miles an hour, and it's going to drop seed. That is so I don't back into a corner and get a strip where I don't plant corn. Okay, so I use that. I use it in corners, and I use it if I stop out in the middle of the field. Now, if I stop in the middle of the field, I don't have to use quick start if I'm going to take and back up. Okay, that serves the same function. Some people don't like to, they just want to hit the quick start. If I don't push quick start, what's going to happen? I'm going to have a gap when I drop that clutch because I'm looking for 3 miles an hour before my GPS is going to say, hey, it's time to spin my meters. All quick start does is take that 3 mile an hour out of the equation, starts to spin meters immediately.
You will have seed start piling up if you don't take off.
Yeah, it's going to spin for 7 seconds. So if it takes me 3 seconds to drop before I drop the clutch, what's going to happen? Why do I stop at 7 seconds? Because sometimes you forget to engage the vacuum if you crawled off and you've disengaged your vacuum. Okay, we're always going to err on the side of safety from that standpoint. Yes. Yeah, so I got flip implement in here. Let me come back here and show you on metric. So right now we're going forward. Sometimes when I back into a corner, you're going to see that planter's actually going to look like it turned around. And at that stage, I keep this on a control page where I can actually come in here. And you notice it actually told me that I was trying to turn around. And you notice when I do that, it's actually creating all kinds of problems for me because I'm actually trying to plant backwards. Right, right. So, when I talk about that, and it's basically what's in the software program, is what I call my Nike swoosh here. Uh, if I back up more than 50 feet, it's going to think you're planting the other direction. So that's why it turns around. So we've got kind of that 50 feet, that's kind of a ballpark, but in the programming side, if I back up less than that, so usually on my 16-row planters, you don't see that. A lot of times on my 24-row planters, we may see that once in a while. Sometimes we got to get squared up to get back into a corner, and it'll actually flip around. If I don't flip that manually, you're actually, when that planter turns around, so if I drop the clutch and take off, that planter is going to swing around. It's going to be clutching off while it's doing that. You're going to have a pile of weeds at that stage. You're going to talk about the engineer's mother. Okay?
So, one quick tip on that. So, Ken was saying it's after 50 feet, you kind of start seeing like the planter's jackknife and it's trying to swoop it, turn it around. Well, if it's going backwards, it's fake painting in front of you. That's what I call it. That's really not seed there. When your planter goes back, now you have paint out in front of you. So when it gets up to that paint, it's going to turn off your rows. But you didn't plant anything there. So the easiest thing to do is if you come here to Alex 2020, we talked about that swath, this button on the right hand side. Turn that swath switch off. It's going to turn it into a ground dry planter. It's going to plant all the time. Plant through it. Once you get through there, turn it back on. Most guys will forget to turn it back on for about 3-4 passes until you look at your maps and you see that it's been overlapping for the past 15 feet. But hey, then you just say, I'll rip it out with an anhydrous applicator and keep moving. So, but if you see it kind of starting to do that Essen thing, just instantly turn off your swath switch and just keep planting until it gets it figured out. I've seen it along some high power electric lines too. Guys would go through a field and they did it 10 times down the field, just kept swapping. Well, we're just stealing that GPS information. So whatever we're seeing is kind of how we interpret that. But another thing, I'm kind of taking a tangent, but this is kind of GPS errors. Has everyone planted a field and you've ever had like 93,000 acres in your field? Anyone ever seen that? Okay, well, good. Every once in a while I get that call every year. It's like, hey, I just planted a farm and it's 20 acres and it says it's 93,000. What happened? Every once in a while, I mostly see this on deer systems. It'll glitch and it'll drop a location pin where you're at, and then all says, hey, you drove to St. Louis, Missouri and back in about a half a second. And the 2020 doesn't always filter that, but you planted the whole time. And so your acres per hour is pretty impressive at that point. But you might have a lot of acres. So typically, if you're running the iPad, it doesn't always catch that or doesn't always do that. There's not really much of a fix for that unless we send field files in.
To say right now, that's the only way I have to fix that.
On field view, you can actually edit the acres after you're done planting back to what you assume it is. But every once in a while, we do see some of that. So that's kind of the issue is you drove to St. Louis and back.
Talk through a little bit how you set up a screen normally for everybody. Do you have a standard you use? Do you customize for everybody?
Yeah, it kind of varies back and forth. I actually kind of like how you're doing it here a little bit. This depends how much equipment you have. I always kind of on a standard setup, top right corner, I kind of like field acres, vacuum, skips and doubles, kind of down the right, kind of like how Ken has it, and then smart firm information, kind of where he has it as well. That's honestly very similar to how I like it. Then in the bottom, downforce seating, I put the V-Drive Quick Start down that bottom right corner as well, kind of like where the virtual equipment would be. This is pretty similar to how I would do it. This one has liquid on it, so Ken has shrunk over some of his information on the left-hand side and on the center. I think if you're running liquid and you want to map, take a picture of this. This is a pretty good way to set it up. If you're just running B-Drive Delta Force Smart Firmer, some of those basic things, you can kind of leave the two big box in the top left and top center. Yeah, I think this looks pretty nice. It's definitely got more information than probably what most of you guys would need.
Right. And I usually don't use average spacing.
Yeah, SRI, vacuum, field acre, skips multiples, and then smart firm information is usually what I put in there.
Yeah.
Getting that in a little bit.
So there's automatic targets, okay? And I always tell everybody, this is good, but in my mind, I consider this a hired man setting, okay? And some of the guys at the office disagree with me. They like standard. Standard's basically 100 to 110 pounds is what I'm looking for. And that's going to catch you the majority of the time. And here's always my statement, and you've probably heard me say it before. The first day you plant, I know that 80% of your field is pretty nice, but there's 20% that has a few little damp spots. And that damp spot really dictates to me more of what I need to worry about. So I have a tendency to come in here. I'm going to go to a custom mode. I can't show you that. But basically in custom mode, I'm going to start the first day and I'm going to actually start about 85 to 90 pounds. I'm going to just lighten that up a little bit that first day. I have the same thing as on day 2 because I think that you all go plant your driest field first. Day 2 looks almost identical to day 1. If I'm still planting day 3, day 4, I know that your damp spots are getting smaller. Now I'm ready to probably take you up to that 100 pounds of down pressure. Now, I got to ask the question, anybody running CNH planters in here? RID tires? Okay, that's a whole different conversation at that stage, so don't worry about it. If I'm still planting, so last spring, I got pretty dry. I assume you got a little dry once in a while too? If I'm dry, can I go up and down pressure? Absolutely. I have no problems running on up to 130, 140 pounds of margin. That's what this is. When I talk about target, okay, that's actually changing back here on home screen what my margin is. So here at this point, when I'm looking at ground contact, I always want ground contact between 98 to 100%. Margin becomes the second thing I look at. And I want extra, so when I come to that wheel track, that row unit doesn't come up. But I don't want sidewall compaction. So this is the battle that I'm trying to face, is where's the right point? The drier the condition, extra pressure will never cause hatchet roots. You don't have enough moisture to do that. So if I'm digging behind my furrow, what am I looking for? How soft, if I take my pocket knife, take my jackknife, and I touch my wall, if it collapses, hammer down. You're in good shape. I check in the driest soil, I check in the wettest soil in my farm. And you all know in every farm you have where the dampest spot is. So I want you to stop that planter, get off and dig in each location. And at that stage, if I have not caused sidewall compaction in the dampest area, you can run. But I need to make sure I'm holding my moisture around the seed in those dry areas. So do I have enough down pressure? All I'm doing is transferring weight to the gauge wheels, right? And I say ballpark, when I'm looking at your field, I don't want to see a big deep indentation where that gauge wheel ran. Those are kind of how I use that. So I like this, what I call custom setting, and I will slide that, and I'm going to run from about 85 on up to about 140, 130, depending upon the ground conditions that I'm planting in the field. How do you set?
Yeah, no, I think last year I was running with a guy, and it was definitely early spring, and it was wet, and we ran down to 60. 60 to 70 pounds of margin. That's about as low as I've ever seen it. But out in the low swells of this field, there's 5-foot elevation changes. So not hills, but a little swell. You could mud ball it and throw it at somebody. 60, that was 60. That was wet. It was too wet. He had to replant that farm a little bit too. So I think 85 to that 90 is always a good starting point in the conventional. If you're no-till and it's a little rougher, you can probably start at that 100 and build up from there as it gets drier. Does anyone need a quick refresher on just understanding just what the ground contact margin reading means? Does everyone understand that, or should I give you a quick refresher? Quick refresher? Okay, I'm going to jump on the table. Can't tell me if I'm wrong on this. So margin is the weight that the load cell is reading on the gauge wheel tires. So there's a load cell that would be exciting. I do not need a broken leg before spring comes. Done that once before. So in a sense, imagine my 2-feeder gauge wheel tires. I weigh 200 pounds. I'm currently applying 200 pounds of margin to the ground. That makes sense. So, what's that? Weight, margin, it would be the same concept. Yep. So if I would pick my feet off the ground, I currently have, imagine just like my left foot, I have 0% ground contact, 0 pounds of margin. As you lower your planter down, your gauge wheels touch, and I'm not applying any pressure here, but it's touching. And once your tire comes up and it hits your depth stop, you're 2 inches, you're not going any deeper. I have 100 pounds of, or 100% ground contact, 0 pounds of margin. I'm not carrying any weight. So I'm at my depth with it, which is good. But now, how much extra weight do you want to carry on that row unit as you go through the field? So if you hit a hard spot, a tire track, that row unit stays there. Sure, delta force will counteract that, and if it comes up, it'll push it back down. But that little second time there, having that extra weight. So as I start to lean on it, now I'm putting 20, 30, 40, 50 pounds of margin. And so what the delta force cylinder will do as you're going through the field, it's looking at that reading, and it can push up to 650 pounds of physical down pressure on that row unit. And it can lift 450 pounds on that row unit. So we have a range from negative 450 lift to 650 down. All right, was that 1,100 pounds? Is that my 1,100 pounds of variance? So if you're going through the field, does anyone ever have issues keeping your planter frame in the ground? Planter frame ever come up on anybody? I see a few guys smiling. Yep. I've had some people have their markers hanging out way out there. You know who you are. Just to keep weight on it. We get some rough scenarios, cover crop. So if I have 100 pounds of margin and my frame is coming out of the ground, if my cylinders are max out at 650 pounds of downforce and I start upping my margin from 100 to 150, will that help me?
Not going to change a thing.
Why not? Well, I told it to put more down. Well, that cylinder is allowed to hunt anywhere from negative 450 to 650. When you set your margin, it will go anywhere in that range to get there. So if you got 100 pounds of margin and all your cylinders are pushing as hard as they can, and there's not enough weight in your frame's going to start coming up. Either row units go down or frame comes up, one of the two. So it doesn't really actually help more. What actually helps is going down. Because when you start lowering your margin, well, now the rows that are actually getting enough in the ground, or they're getting in the ground, if you lower your margin to 60, that puts more weight back into the bar for other rows to use to get back in the ground. So if you're struggling with frame issues, one thing, row cleaners, I've had some people applying a lot of pressure on the row cleaners, down pressure, lightening those up, puts weight back into the bar so that the row units can use it. It's all physics. Lightening up on your closing wheels, planting a little shallower, planting a little slower, less margin so other rows can use it. Those are all scenarios. Does that make sense? I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
In 1790s, if you have 1790s, 95s, the split fronts or split rears. Other quick thing I'll mention is as you're planting through the field, have someone ride Decide on a Ranger. Parallel arms to parallel arms. Try to get them to match. If your front parallel arms are level and your back parallel arms are nosed up really high, you pick your 3-point up. Your center bar is just going to pivot a little bit. Your rear bar is physically going to move up and down. So when you pick up your 3-point, the W plates that the parallel arms are mounted to will physically start to lower down. It'll put more pressure on those back rows. So if you no-till beans, run your hitch high. Typically, your disc openers, no-till holders don't wear right. I think when we change out on your planter, backs are usually like 14 and a half, and the fronts are usually 14 3/4. No, 14 and a half on the fronts, 14 3/4 on the backs. They don't wear the same, but it helps them get depth. So
Yeah, so if you're watching my screen up here, look at my ground contact. I'm running 100 pounds. I've only got margin at 65. If I'm running 65 margin, do I have to have more margin? As long as I got 100% ground contact, what am I telling you? You're achieving depth. You don't have any problems. So depending upon how consistent, now look at my good ride, okay? Now I do have one row there, a good ride, look at the 76 on row 5, okay? So that's going to become a problem, but I'm still maintaining ground contact. I'm actually applying only 49 pounds of margin at this stage. As long as I'm at 100, I don't have to have a lot of extra margin. As soon as I start going 96, 97, now I got to start saying, hey, we need to balance this out, right? That's the battle we're in, is always trying to find where's the sweet spot. Are we comfortable with downforce? While I'm here, I want to talk a little bit, and you've all seen this, right? And there's my gauge wheel imprint, okay? I don't like that. We understand what that is. We understand the too heavy. If I'm coming in, I'm looking at your scenario here, I'm telling you what, okay? Ground contact's 100%. I got margin way up at 270. That's a problem. Here's ground contact at 68, so what? Margin's got to go up. I had 73 pounds of margin, which isn't real bad, except I didn't maintain depth. Okay, my ground contact has to be that 100%. And you can see my blue dots is telling me what? I struggle to get that depth. So these are the things we're trying to chase, right? And I always say that 100 pounds is going to be close, but depending upon how damp that is, that still may not quite be where I need to be. And the reason I focus on it is right here, right? When I start looking at my ground contact, I know that if I lose ground contact, I've lost bushels. If I get really light, I'm losing some bushels. I need that 100 to 150 pounds is usually what's going to win. Now, this is a grower that's in a no-till, okay? So it doesn't surprise me he needs to be a little on the heavier side than what you guys in conventional are going to be.
One other piece to consider as we're talking about this would be your furrow moisture. And I'll let these guys jump in and correct me if I'm not quite saying it right, but furrow moisture, the metrics that's based off of is it takes 1/3 of the moisture of the weight of the seed to germ correctly. So typically, you're going to want to maintain a 32, 33% moisture that you're planting into. So if you're going and the field cultivators worked ahead of you, and as you're planting, and if you start dropping below 30%, you are no longer going to evenly imbibe that 1/3 of the weight of the seed and moisture as evenly. So I would really encourage you guys to try to maintain that 32% or higher. You don't necessarily have to be at 40 or 45. At some point, you can probably back off your depth a little bit or play with that. But we're finding more and more that some guys will say, "Well, I'm at 30% and I'm planting in the moisture. I went and looked and it looks good." I'm not going to argue that it won't come up. Or yeah, if you start dropping below 30%, maybe Ken can even address it. I think the rate that you pull in the moisture starts to vary as you start dropping below that 30%. You can, but you probably better start praying too.
But yeah, I mean, those are things you got to factor in. I mean, yeah, it could rain, you could plant that, which is a quarter, 15%. That's fine. If it rains, it's gonna grow.
If you got a rain like we had last night, right? I mean, we just plastered everything in. It don't matter how shallow I was, we just pounded it. Okay. But as a whole, what do I look for? And here's what I want to come back to again. Okay. And I always say when I'm setting that down for us, it is a balance. I got to say, what's my lightest? What's my heaviest? And where do I bring that together? And I always say the trench always tells you I have to hold the trench. So on the right, we can tell, well, that's way too light. The center, what do you think? Are we close? If I was looking at that and digging behind the planter, I tied my closing wheel up and I drove 50 feet. I don't want to drive farther than 50 feet because I got to cover it all up my hand, right? So I'm looking at it, I'm like, well, if my trench collapsed, my risk is we still needed probably another 10 pounds, 15 pounds. So if you're willing to take the time to do this, I can always dial this in exactly where I need to be. Now, when I talk about this moisture, okay, we understand where I'm headed. If I'm coming in and I'm digging, I know that what? I had to create the trench, but if I created sidewalls enough that I couldn't close, now I have a problem. And you will, is that a closing issue or a down pressure issue? Could be either one. Okay, by looking at the slide, I can't tell you for sure which one it is. I know you failed at the end of the day on the left, right? But by the same token, when I come in here and I'm looking to see at this point, did I do a good job or did I fail? I got rid of the V trench, but if you notice, I have a little bit of what I call a dry dirt zone where we actually let dry dirt fall down into my trench. So I got to ask the question, was that a gauge wheel that wasn't shimmed in properly? Or was that the fact that my wall was collapsing at this stage? At this stage, I have to go up in my down pressure. I got to make sure I don't have dry dirt around that seed. Okay, pretty close to where I need to be, but not quite.
Ken, I have had that before where we were doing a plot 2 years ago and it was late. That's where we had corn planted 2.5 inches deep. It was hot and it came out of the ground in 5 days. That kind of scenario. But I remember digging and I had my margin. I kept upping it and gauge wheels were adjusted on our little plot planter. It doesn't get much wear, so it was adjusted tight. I still had dirt in the seed trench. We had good moisture, but I think I had 35 to 37% on my furrow moisture, and that moisture wicked over and germed that seed. Within a few hours, that whole trench, if you dug it back up, was wet. So there is some scenarios where if it dries incredibly fast or gets hot, I have seen that. Dirt was falling in, and I couldn't stop it. But if you have good moisture, I have seen it wick over. Does that make sense? I mean,
It does. And you know that's what I call the ideal scenario. We don't want to count on it, but it forgives a lot of mistakes, right? And if you notice, I always say I want my moisture at least a half inch above my seed, so I had good moisture in this exact scenario, right?
Yeah.
I'm very comfortable at that point. And I always tell everybody, if I walk along the creek bank, what do you always notice? Water always wicks up higher than what the water is, right? It's always, that is capillary action, and that is working for you. That can work in this scenario, and you are blessed with that opportunity, okay? To know that, what do I have to do? If I'm digging and I'm seeing that, what would I do? I would increase the amount of pressure I have on my closing, right? I want to make sure that I'm going to seal that a little tighter. That will help that capillary action at this stage. Okay?
I think we have 5 minutes or so before we start to break.